Well, hey, friends, welcome to Awakening's Ask a Scholar podcast. This is where you, the everyday Christian, can get your questions about the Bible answered by a biblical scholar. I'm Carla.
And I'm Mike, and we're both glad that you decided to join our discussion. So let's dive in.
Well, welcome everyone to episode 31. We are really excited to get your questions on the book of Ecclesiastes answered today. And today we have with us James Michael Smith, who you may recognize as the host of Disciple Dojo podcast. But we just want to say welcome, James. Thank you for joining us. And I know we're going to kind of refer to you here on as JM. So for those that are listening, that's the name that he goes by. But JM, why don't you take a second and just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your podcast, about your ministry, and then we'll jump into some questions.
Sure. I run a ministry, a YouTube channel. We do have a podcast, but the bulk of what we do is YouTube. So the audio stuff, sometimes we'll feed it to the Dojo podcast, but it's a YouTube channel, Disciple Dojo. I was pastor of discipleship at a large church here in Charlotte during and after seminary for about 5 years, and then stepped down to start Disciple Dojo. The name comes from, I'm also a martial arts teacher. I'm a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and I run a ministry a weekly ministry teaching anti-bullying and self-defense to refugee and immigrant kids here in Charlotte, as well as local lower income kids. Just the people that need what I've grown up in the martial arts having, but don't have the money necessarily to join and pay monthly dues at an academy. So it's a completely free program through Disciple Dojo. And then the rest of what we do is online ministry, YouTube. I have a Facebook ministry for single adults that's part of the ministry I oversee, and teach the Bible. So just professional Bible nerd on YouTube. That's probably the best way to describe it. And a little bit eclectic. Let me just elephant in the room. I've got all these action figures and stuff around me. We do a series on the channel called Superhero Seminary, where I actually use these action figures in a very cheesy robot chicken type way to explain biblical, theological, scholarly concepts. So if anybody's interested, check that out. It's a fun playlist. But yeah, YouTube Bible nerd and jiu-jitsu instructor, and happy to be here.
That's awesome. Those are incredible ministries. It's so cool to hear what you're doing for the kids in that area. I'm sure that is really a blessing to a lot of those. So we're excited to learn from you today. And you have some resources. You've done a decent amount of study on the book of Ecclesiastes, correct?
Yes, on one of our single adult, the ministry I do is called the Grown Ups Table, and it's just a community for unmarried Christians. It's not a dating ministry. It's just you're not married, you need community. It's hard to find in churches. Come connect with others. So we do a summer retreat every year. The first retreat we did 2 years ago, this is our third one that we just had last week, but I taught through the book of Ecclesiastes to them over the course of the retreat. Just translated and studied and kind of fell in love with it. It's one of those books that we'll talk about, like people don't know what to do with. Yeah. And if you don't already like poetry, which most of us don't just in general, it's harder. And then the content is so unlike what's in the rest of Scripture that it's a challenge. Yeah. So Disciple Dojo, we lean into the really challenging parts of Scripture to lead average, everyday, normal, non-scholarly, non-Bible nerd people through these difficult parts of inspired Scripture.
Awesome. Well, we are excited to learn from you today. And so on that note, I'm going to just lead us into our first question and see what you have to say about it. The first question that came in says, I had always been told that Solomon was the writer of Ecclesiastes, especially when he was an old man, looking back on his life and realizing how meaningless it was. Yet, as I've studied and read other commentaries, there seems to be a majority of scholars who do not think Solomon was the actual writer. If these scholars are correct, how does that change it, or does it indicate that the scriptures are not inspired?
Well, it definitely doesn't indicate the scriptures aren't inspired.
Right.
That's the first point. The authorship of Ecclesiastes, just like the authorship of the Song of Songs, for instance, or other wisdom books, it doesn't tie itself specifically to King Solomon. It does, the speaker, he calls himself Kohelet, and I usually call the book Kohelet. If I accidentally say Kohelet, just know I mean Ecclesiastes, but that's the Hebrew name, Kohelet, which just means gatherer or assembler. And he is described as son of David, who was king over Jerusalem. So other than that, it describes, searching for wisdom and doing building projects. There are things that fit Solomon, but nothing in the book says this, I, King Solomon, am writing this. So there's divided opinion on it. Traditional interpretation will say exactly what the question said, that this is Solomon looking back on his life. And personally, I think if Solomon is the author, then that would be the time that the book would be fitting. Like it would have been at the end of his life. But I don't think necessarily that Solomon has to be the author. There are scholars make the arguments for Solomon or against Solomonic authorship by noting there are things like words that are very, very late. Like there's the word, I think, paradise is a loan word, like a later period. And that's not I don't think that's an ironclad argument, because words can work their way into a language long before they become dominant. There are modern words that were in English, they just maybe didn't have the same connotation or the same meaning. So I don't think that's a slam dunk. I think critical scholars typically like to pull apart the text. They like to posit different authorships. They like to look for and late date things just out of habit. I'm not persuaded by that, but I also don't dismiss it. My personal view, I think the book does not have to be written by Solomon, but I think Kohelet is very much a Solomonic figure. He is depicted as someone doing what Solomon did, basically. So it could be like I don't know, a later ode or homage to Solomon, or to a Solomonic quest for wisdom, glory, meaning, all of that kind of stuff, putting it in the mouth of Solomon. Something like, say, Hamilton, the play, kind of puts these things in the mouths of the founding fathers, which they never said. But the whole point is to put you back in that time period, but to see it in a new way. So I don't think that's impossible. I'm kind of agnostic on whether it's Solomon or not. I don't think it's a hill to die on. A good argument for, I've reviewed study Bibles a lot. In the Archaeological Study Bible by Zondervan, which is edited by Dwayne Garrett and produced by Gordon Conwell, or was produced by Gordon Conwell and Zondervan back in the 2000s. They, in a Kohelet, in Ecclesiastes, they make the case for Solomonic authorship, and they make a pretty good case. But it's not a slam dunk. Honestly, I don't think it affects anything about the meaning of the book personally.
I mean, coming from Gordon Conwell as well, that was typically the way that also professors would talk about the Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs. But at the same time, there's also just this awareness that Solomon became a very legendary figure, right? Like all these tales, all these ideas of he knew how to do magical arts of healing. He knew all this wisdom about every animal in the world. And like this whole entire kind of mystique grew around Solomon. And so it's not surprising that if we're going to present a wisdom literature text, especially something that, as we're going to get into later, kind of really dark or very depressing to some people at times, there is almost this kind of pull to, well, we ought to listen to this, because if it's coming from a person who is at least within the Solomon tradition of thinking, well, then it's worthwhile. We ought to give it a little bit more credence and to actually consider it. We may not like it, but at least let us consider the wisdom that is found in these words. I think sometimes folks may get a little too wrapped up in it has to be this particular author, as though that's where our confidence is. But I think the greater reality is that the community, the people of God, right, JM, that over time, just by how the Spirit moves through the church and through the people of God, there is this realization, this actually was helpful. This was actually insightful. This gave me a connection and an insight about God that I never realized before. And just overall, communal-wise, we came to this conclusion. So I think that's part of how we came to that idea. This is inspired, because there's something timeless about these words that still affects even people today.
Yeah. And let me make one more point too, because I forgot to mention this. Kohelet has a frame structure. There's a narrator at the beginning, and then there's Kohelet, the assembler, the preacher, the teacher, and it's him his quest for wisdom and all of that. And then at the end, the composer steps back in and says some things about Kohelet. So there, even if it's one author composing this whole thing, there are multiple voices. There are at least two voices in the text itself as it's given us in Scripture.
Yeah.
That's great. Awesome. Very helpful, so that we go into this with the right mindset. So let me jump us to the second question. And this one says, Ecclesiastes surprised me. This is the student saying this, surprised me because I thought it was a wisdom book, but it seems more like a philosophy book, especially with a slant towards nihilism. I know that is more of a modern term, but the book's tone, especially when Ecclesiastes 1 verses 12 through 16 talks about how wisdom, though is better than folly, that both the wise and the foolish person end up dead. I'm struggling in seeing how applicable this book can be in my life, especially when it's so pessimistic and nihilistic towards living. What am I missing? So break down the practicality of what we're reading, because we read a lot of things that are just very pessimistic in this book. So I'm curious your thoughts on this one.
The number one thing is you cannot read Kohelet in pieces. The whole book is a treatise, it's a poem, it's a song, it's whatever you want to call it, but it's one thing. So it's not like an epistle or a proverbial collection where you can read a section, take it out, ponder it. You're on a journey. Kohelet is on a journey, and you have to read it as a journey. And if you stop midway through, you're not at the destination. So that's why it's so dangerous for preachers to preach a passage or a section from Ecclesiastes without thoroughly grounding it in the book itself. It would be like pulling a passage out of Huckleberry Finn where Mark Twain is talking about or writing about slavery and using these horrible racist terms without knowing that the whole book was undermining the concept of slavery, and it was to present Jim as a fellow human being and a friend of Huck. If you just looked at the chapter, it's like, man, this is super racist and problematic. What good is there in this? So Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, is the same way. The journey is the destination. And what you're doing, I love that whoever wrote that question said nihilism or nihilism. I think that's exactly right. In fact, Christopher Wright, this is the best entry-level book on, that's Habakkuk. Hold on a second. He's written two. He wrote, and of course, I put it somewhere that I can't find. Oh, here it is. So Christopher Wright wrote Hearing the Message of Ecclesiastes. This is the best entry-level, popular-level book on Ecclesiastes I've ever come across. And his quote, he says, Kohelet circles around the abyss of nihilism and pessimism, but remains a believer. So it's like Kohelet is willing to, I think it was Derek Kidner said that Kohelet, wisdom and God, like a relationship with God, is his base camp, but he's not afraid to venture out and climb parts of the mountain that are dangerous. And so whichever metaphor you use, I think both of those are brilliant metaphors. Kohelet is seeking and questioning, and he is asking the questions and saying the things that everybody thinks, but no one's willing to say a lot of times.
Yeah.
And the theme, how can Genesis 1 and 2 be true? The goodness of creation, the beauty of creation, the joy of earthiness. How can that be true in a Genesis 3 world where it's fallen and death? The constant in Kohelet that leads him to, he butts up against the same obstacle every single time, which is death. When you die, it's over. So if this is all there is, this is all there is. And death undoes everything, and it's all hebel, vapor, just ephemeral, gone. Sometimes translated as vanity or meaningless, but it literally means smoke. So that's, Kohelet is like, I'll give one more example because I'm a pop culture nerd. The movie The Sixth Sense. M. Night Shyamalan made a movie. If you haven't seen it, I mean, it's like 20-something. I don't want to, that's probably spoilers. But the whole key to the movie is the final scene.
Right.
And then once you realize I'm not going to spoil it, what has happened in that final scene, you're supposed to go back and rewatch the movie. And when you rewatch the movie, knowing what you know in that final scene, the whole movie takes on a different feel.
Yeah.
Kohelet is that way. I think it was Robert Chisholm that made this analogy. I'm not making this up. It was a good analogy though. When you read Kohelet the first time, you're just like, where is this going? How can you say these things? How is this biblical? You get to the end, and then you're like, okay, this is where he ended up. This is the fruit of the journey. I need to go back and reread this. And it's meant to be done repeatedly, over and over and over. It's not a narrative. You pick up, read, get the story, and move on. It's meant to be pondered and turned over. That's the wisdom literature part. It's meant to be meditated upon, but as a whole.
That's good.
Yeah, I think this was part of the reason why over the last couple of years, and I've probably talked Carla's ear off so many times of just like how much I've come to love books like the Book of Job or Ecclesiastes, because there's something very distinct about, I mean, the Book of Proverbs, for example, it's great. And the Book of Psalms is wonderful. But then the Book of Psalms has those Psalms of lament. The Book of Job is encountering the harsh reality of suffering. And with Ecclesiastes, we constantly are being reminded that life is hevel, and that this is what life is like under the sun. And just something about that reality, that there's something very authentic of the engagement with when life isn't going well. And so many times the reality is life does not go very well for us all the time. But we just don't want to talk about it. We don't want to admit it. And we don't want to share about it with people for some reason. Like as though we're ashamed about it. And
That's
so
a great...
I think
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
it's just simply, there's something really engaging about a biblical text that really just acknowledges life is hard. And we just wonder, what is the point of it all if it is just kept under the sun?
Yes, that's the point that I wanted to key in on, what you're saying. That phrase, under the sun, tachas shemesh, under the sun, under the sun. It's used constantly because what's under the sun? Everything in this creation, everything in this world is under the sun. Who is not under the sun? God. So it's not giving you, this is the objective reality. It's giving you, this is what life is like under the sun for those of us down here. It's the same thing Gilgamesh struggled with. And in the Gilgamesh epic, there's some similarities between the advice Gilgamesh is given about just enjoy life under the sun, but he's not given the transcendent vantage point of the God who created it all. It's just, hey, Gilgamesh, this is as good as you can expect. Your quest to overcome death after your friend Enkidu's death, and you're finding meaning. The answer for Gilgamesh gets is there is no meaning, so just enjoy the ride. The answer that Kohelet arrives at the end, is rooted in the character and the reality of God, even though it feels like a Gilgamesh-type world.
I think, in some sense, because of that, I think maybe that's why at times, like, I'm agnostic about whether it's Solomon or not, right? But because of how really just this material engages with hardship, with the reality of death, it does bring into my mind of like a people who've experienced immense suffering and are just wondering, weren't we, the people of God, supposed to be a kingdom forever and ever? Like, what is then the meaning of it all if everything has been now just wiped out? That we see it really all just turns to ash and dust. And so I can kind of understand why some would lean towards a later date and later writing because of just the experiences of the people of God through history.
Yeah, that's good. Awesome. I was just, as you guys were talking, I was just rereading the last verse in Ecclesiastes, and it's just interesting how it ties into everything that you guys were saying. That's awesome. Okay, well, let's jump to a quick commercial break, and then we are going to come back and hit a couple more questions before we wrap up this episode. If you're not already reading with us, we'd love to have you start reading today. Every month in the Awakening Bible community, we read a book or several books of the Bible together. Readings are only 1 to 3 chapters a day, 5 days a week, with weekends reserved for catch-up or deeper study. And as you read, we know that you will likely encounter questions, but that's where we come in. Submit your questions at AWKNG.com, and we will do our best to get them answered for you right here on the Ask a Scholar podcast. All right, well, welcome back, everyone. We're going to dive right into two final questions and get some more wisdom from JM, who's with us here today. So, this next question says in Ecclesiastes 3, verses 18 through 21, and Mike, maybe you can pull that up so you can read those verses so we know. The question says, I'm confused by Solomon's words that humans are like animals. I thought human beings were different because we were made in God's image. Also, why does Solomon not know if human spirits rise to heaven or not? Did ancient Jews not believe in a heaven and a hell? So, Mike, why don't you kick us off by just reading those verses, and then JM jump in with your thoughts on that.
Okay, so Ecclesiastes 3, 18 to 21, I'll be reading from the NIV translation. I also said to myself, as for humans, God tests them so that they may see that they are like the animals. Surely, the fate of human beings is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. Humans have no advantage over animals. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place, all come from dust, and to dust all return. Who knows if the human spirit rises upward, and if the spirit of the animal goes down into the earth?
That's pretty bleak.
Yeah.
And people struggle with this. Again, this is where you cannot read Ecclesiastes piecemeal. You have to read the whole thing. Kohelet is on a quest, and he is observing the world how it is to him. And the thing that keeps coming up is death. Now, the idea of humans being the cattle of the gods, that's found, I believe, in Egyptian literature in their creation account. That's found throughout the ancient Near East. Humans were the workhorses of the gods. They got their food, they tended their crops, they brought them sacrifices. That is the lot that humanity was created for. And so this is the world as it appears. It's not just in Kohelet. I don't know if you guys want to turn, but in Psalm 49:10, you find almost the exact same thought. This was part of the liturgy this Sunday at church. I'm part of an Anglican church here in Charlotte, and this was one of the readings. There's weekly readings, and I was like, I'm going to be talking about Kohelet this week, and this is the most fitting verse. I can read the NIV.
Yeah.
Or Mike, if you want to read it, or
Yeah, I can read it. It says, Psalm 49:10, for all concede that the wise die, that the foolish and the senseless also perish, leaving their wealth to others.
and keep going 2 more verses through verse 12.
Their tombs will remain, their houses forever, their dwellings for endless generations, though they had named lands after themselves. People, despite their wealth, do not endure. They are like the beasts that perish.
This is, I mean, you could summarize, that's a summary of what Kohelet's wrestling with in the Psalm. It is how the world appears to be. If you've ever stood at a graveside, you've buried a loved one, you know that it's unsettling. It's so final. It seems so final. And even the most ardent believers with the strongest faith, if you're honest, I think there's always that little question of, what if this is it? What if my what I've been told is just a comforting fairy tale? What if there's doubt even among the most, vibrant believers? At times we all experience that doubt. Kohelet is giving voice to it. And he's looking at, this past year, I had my dog I've had for 14 years. I had to bury him, and it was his time. And I buried him, and I was digging the grave, and I put his little coffin into the grave and covered it over. And every time I pull up, I buried him at the Jiu-Jitsu Academy that I trained at. Every time I pull up, I see his little gravestone with a memorial. And it means so much to me because I had a relationship with him. He was like my only constant in life for 14 years. Well, with a person, you do the same thing. I mean, obviously it's a greater loss. It impacts you at a deeper level. But at the end of the day, Kohelet's like, this is what the reality is. Death seems to have the last word. Who knows if this is all true or a fairy tale? He's in the midst of this existential grappling, and he's giving voice to it. And the fact that it made it into inspired scripture, to me, it speaks volumes of how much God wants us to give voice to our genuine doubts, to our real doubts. It's not the end of the story. Remember, you got to read the whole book.
Right.
He doesn't end there, but he does go through there, and we've all gone through there as well.
I mean, it's weird timing because when we're filming this, it's actually a few days away after my my big sister's birthday, and less than 3 years ago, she passed away because of a struggle through cancer that eventually overtook her. And it was, for the last couple of weeks for me, this weird realization that both her death date and her birthday are now essentially, they feel the same to me. It's a strange realization that the day that normally we would be celebrating with balloons and cake or gifts or birthday cards became a day as well of memorial for me and my wife. I mean, we visited her niche on her birthday on that morning on Saturday to wish her a happy birthday, but at the same time, I mean, there's the irony. It's like it's a day to celebrate the birth of life, like specifically her day of life, and yet it's also just stark right against the reality that she is no longer physically alive. And so it's interesting about how, in the end, death is that great equalizer for all of us human beings. We all face it, we all experience it, we all encounter it. And again, it's part of the reason why, like, I am floored by the fact that the scriptures, that God himself will allow and actually even bring this issue up for all of us to engage with. And in a manner that is coming from his perspective, ultimately, that actually reminds us there is something beyond it, and that he's the one that did overcome it. And so, but I agree, sometimes it can be very hard to understand, like, what do I do in the midst of this? What do I do in the midst of this contradiction that I feel on a birthday that is also reminding me of her death day?
And the Old Testament, too, it's good to keep in mind. I mean, some people make too much of this and some people don't make enough. The Old Testament does unfold concept of the afterlife. I'm not in the view that says the Old Testament has no concept of it. I don't think that's persuasive. I think you get hints, glimpses, echoes, and pointers toward an everlasting resurrected God undoing death. Isaiah, talking about on this mountain, he will destroy death. And so, but you never get it spelled out how, what it looks like, when it's going to happen, any of that stuff. So there's a huge amount of uncertainty and doubt. And then when Jesus comes and goes through death and comes back from death, something that should not happen until the final resurrection, he actually does it in advance. That's what's so mind-blowing. We live 2,000 years on the other side of that, where we just think, oh yeah, life after death, we take it for granted. So I don't think the Old Testament believers had any type of firm concept of what it would be like, but I think they had a trust in the God who raises the dead, and they knew that he would take care of it. And that's as far as they get. So I don't think Ecclesiastes, if you try to look into a theology of the afterlife into Ecclesiastes, you're already, it's like using a phone book to cook a recipe. Like you're already using the tool for the wrong thing.
So to the part of the question that the person said, why does Solomon not know if human spirits rise to heaven or not? You would say he didn't necessarily know. Is that what you're implying?
I think you could make a case for that, because the spirit going to like the body goes into the earth, and God, even if he believed, let's call it orthodoxy, that he, let's say he knew of Isaiah, even though Solomon lived before that, but if it is a later book by a Solomonic figure, even if he knew the concept of God will raise the dead, there's still question of, but what happens at death? And does the breath, the ruach, where does it go? Does it rise up to God? Does it go down to the earth and sleep? Because that seems to be what happens with every other animal.
Yeah.
So I don't think he had a firm view of it, but I also don't think he had that it's against any view. I think he's very agnostic, and he's being transparently agnostic.
That's good.
And JM, I would also just to me, it also doesn't bother me if this is a progressive kind of unfolding and understanding, because there's something very traumatic about the experience of death, watching a loved one die. I mean, like me and my wife were there right on my sister's side as she breathed out her last breath. It still haunts me. There's still those memories, and so I can imagine over time, like people just what happens after that. I don't know, but then there's this speculation, this wondering, like there has to be something. We intuitively know death feels wrong. There's something wrong about this. Like we go through life, we gain all this wisdom and knowledge, we go through the struggle of trying to secure our families, making sure people that we love are cared for, and then we're gone. And it just doesn't feel right for some reason. It bothers every human being, Christian or not. And so I think something about just that universality, people are looking for an answer because we felt that there is something not right about this experience.
And Ecclesiastes is kind of leaving space to grapple with that, which is nice, like you guys talked about, because that's not necessarily in every area of the Bible. So to have these certain books like this, like Job, where we can actually see people struggle and grapple with these concepts, gives us freedom to be able to process the pain and the things that we see as well. Awesome. Okay, let's jump to our final question, and then we'll wrap up this episode. Question number 4 says, Ecclesiastes 4, verse 12. The question says, I know I have seen before on t-shirts and bumper stickers, a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. I think we've all heard that. But this person says, I am confused, however, by the rest of the verse and honestly with chapter 4 itself. It seems disjointed, which surprised me because the phrases seem to have a theme, but then switch to another topic, similar to the book of Proverbs. What is the relationship of Ecclesiastes 4:12 to the rest of the chapter? So maybe we should just start by reading 4:12, and then let's hear your thoughts on this, JM.
All right. Okay. I can read that verse. It's Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 12. In the NIV, it says, though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken.
Yeah, it's proverbial. I mean, it literally is a proverb.
Yeah.
And so in Ecclesiastes, this is where, again, the whole, not parts. Back in chapter 3, Kohelet turned a corner. Chapter 1 and 2 are sort of presenting the problem and what he's seeking to do and how he's going to go about doing it. Then, starting in chapter 3, going through chapter 4, up until chapter 5, basically, he is reflecting on different things. So he'll reflect on, for instance, in chapter 3, he'll start with a reflection on time. The famous, there is a time, there's a season, whatever. He reflects on time, and then he still is like, but what's the point? Then he's going to reflect on earthly justice. That's around verses 16 and 17. Then he's going to reflect on mortality in verse 18. And then he's going to just kind of throw up his hands or resign himself in verse 22. Then chapter 4, he is reflecting on earthly oppression and things that happened, oppressed people, the suffering under or on the earth. He's going to reflect then in verse 4 on earthly work and toil. And he's going to throw in a proverb. Sometimes you don't know if he's throwing in a proverb to say this proverb accurately diagnoses the situation, or if he's throwing in a proverb sarcastically and saying, like, this is any answer. So it's how he introduces these little proverbs throughout the book is something that interpreters differ on and they question. Is he being sarcastic? Is he being almost disgusted of like Job when his 3 friends are giving him good theology? For the most part, they're speaking orthodoxy, and Job is saying, yeah, but it's not true. And he'll just be, Job gets sarcastic at one point with his friends out of frustration. So Kohelet goes on, he has a reflection then on verse 7, 8, and 9, and 12 is his reflection on community and the importance of community. And as someone who has, without community, earthly life is even more Hubble. It's even more vapor. Community is everything. So he talks about, some solo workaholic that has worked himself to a grave. And then he realizes, I don't have anyone to give this to. I don't have anything to pass it on to. It has all been a waste. And so then he reflects that community is better, even just on a practical level. You can have division of labor. You can survive an accident. You can, keeping one another warm, helping one another up when they fall down. If an enemy comes, you can overpower them. So Kohelet's like, just remember, he's searching out wisdom, and wisdom is worldly wisdom as well as divine wisdom. So he's reflecting and mulling over the value of community. And even apart from any divine inspiration, people know community is better than isolation. And so that proverb that he throws out is a very true. I think it's one that he's not rebuffing. I think he's unpacking it in the previous verses, and he ends with that proverb, which is the verse that's quoted. And then he goes on to reflect on the rise and fall of royalty. He goes to reflect on temple service, on bureaucracy, riches, business. He's reflecting on all these things. So that's how you situate that verse in the book.
That's good. It's helpful.
This reminds me, Jay, of this was years ago. It was around the time when my lead pastor and the associate pastor at the time, we were all part of this launch team to plant a church in the city of Quincy, south of Boston. And I just happened to find a Kickstarter for some reason that was basically a church service for agnostics and atheists. And I sent it a copy of that link to my pastors because I was just really amazed, because the whole entire proposal for this Kickstarter was, we want to start a gathering maybe on Sunday mornings, hear me out. And basically there'll be songs at the beginning, and we'll be singing songs maybe from the Beatles and, Winehouse and other folks like that. And then we'll have maybe people, every so often give a speech or something about poetry or some sort of bit of science that they learned and they thought was really helpful. And just to get people together to just have a meal and whatever else.
Yep.
And I just realized so it really does not matter whether you're religious or not. The pull and the desire for human community, the pull to actually not just be an island to yourself.
Yeah.
It is so human. And that the irony is, you have a person basically, let's start a church service that is not a church service. Let's worship, even though we're not going to call it worship. We're just going to sing songs. But ultimately they wanted this kind of deep community and connection, and in some sense transcendence, even though they couldn't even call it that way. But it was just amazing to me of wow, that this is such a human desire within all of us.
It's universal, for sure. Yep.
Well, and I think that even speaks to a lot of what you guys have said this podcast episode is Ecclesiastes. It really speaks to all of us. We all struggle with these things. We all have to navigate through these hardships in life. And so it is universal, very much so. It's under the sun.
Yeah.
It's what we all deal with. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for your wisdom on these first 4 questions. We're excited to have you back for a second episode where we're going to tackle and dive into some additional questions that will maybe even dive a little deeper than this first episode. So we just wanted to, we have a fun question that we're going to ask you, but before we ask you that fun question, I do want you to just reiterate your resources one more time. How can people find you? How can they get a hold of your YouTube and podcasts and all of that? Just share that one more time.
Yeah, absolutely. The best way to find me is on YouTube, youtube.com, just Disciple Dojo, not discipleship, but just Disciple Dojo, all one word. And we have an Instagram page, Disciple Dojo. And then I am on Facebook, Disciple Dojo on Facebook, or James Michael Smith. My Facebook page is kind of getting at the point where I may have to start, doing other stuff and just reserving that for personal friends. But you can find me online. And then our website that has information about the ministry, as well as our free video curriculum on different books of the Bible or different resources, is just discipledojo.org. That also has all of our ministry, all of our information about the Refugee Jitsu ministry that we do here in Charlotte.
Awesome. Well, for those that are listening, we're going to link all of those links in the notes. So make sure you click on that, check that out, engage with JM's ministry. And I know that you will find it very beneficial for yourself. Okay, so let us ask you a fun question as we wrap up. Our fun question for you today is, what is your favorite thing to do on vacation? Whether it's going to a place, doing an activity, what would that be?
So if it's winter, snowboarding.
Okay.
Absolutely. If it's winter and I can afford it, snowboarding, rather do that than almost anything. If it's summer, being in the shade, because I am a ginger and the sun is my mortal enemy, but being in the shade somewhere nice with a breeze blowing, reading a really good book with somebody who, people that I just enjoy being around.
Yeah.
Those would probably be top two picks.
Awesome. That sounds fun. I don't know about snowboarding. I can barely ski. I'm like, stick me on the greens, keep me on the greens. I can't go beyond the greens.
I'll get you down. I've taught many people how to ride. We can make it happen. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, great. Well, thank you for being with us. And those that have listened today, thank you for joining us. Remember, you can like, share, subscribe, leave us a review, and we will see you right back here next time to get more questions on the book of Ecclesiastes answered. If you're enjoying the Ask a Scholar podcast, click follow on your podcast listening app to subscribe. Want to help further our mission? Consider becoming a monthly partner at AWKNG.com and help us make an impact in the lives of others all around the world as we work to make biblical understanding accessible to all with no exceptions. Join us next time as we get more of your Bible questions answered. And don't forget to visit AWKNG.com to engage in all our biblical resources that we offer.